If you're looking for the ultimate SUV and you have at least $253,000 to spend, you might want to check out something like this. This is the 2025 Aston Martin DBX707. Named so because in the UK, 707 horsepower lives under the hood. Of course, in the United States, we measure horsepower slightly differently, so this is just under that 700 horsepower mark. Let's take a look around and see what you get if you have a lot of cash around and you want what I think is the ultimate sports SUV. Now, ultimate sports SUV is kind of tricky because there are actually quite a number of options to choose from around the world, especially if you're looking to spend $250,000. So why might you want the Aston Martin over some of the other options? Well, clearly there's the Aston Martin look, that classic distinctive grille that oddly, I think actually works with the DBX's proportions and the DBX's size. It does look awfully hungry though, and from some angles I'm reminded of maybe a cartoon interpretation of what an Aston Martin could be. But I think that overall this design actually fits the Aston Martin a little bit better than some of the other luxury brands and ultra performance brands that have produced SUVs. Let's go in for a look at the detail. Obviously, Aston Martin logo right there, big LED headlights that you can see there, and lots of carbon fiber accents, including these wings that protrude out of these functional grills right there on the hood. Lots and lots of carbon fiber is happening all the way around the DBX. We have the splitter down there at the bottom of the bumper. We also have carbon fiber accents along the side, carbon fiber mirror covers, carbon fiber sills down there at the bottom. The structure of this is sort of related to the other Aston Martins that are currently in production, but enough has changed that Aston says this is riding effectively on a dedicated SUV platform, because so much of the structure had to change in order to adapt to things like the adaptive air suspension, the nearly 7,000 pounds of towing capability that we find in this model. Just over 6,900 pounds of towing can happen, which is why on the back here, we actually find something I never thought I would see on an Aston, honestly, and that is a 2-inch hitch receiver with a 7 and a 4-pin wiring harness connection. It's tucked really far under the bumper though, and really far under this carbon fiber aero treatment to the lower bumper, which definitely I think would get scuffed up or scratched up if you did plan on connecting a trailer to it. You might be wondering, isn't this a little on the low side? Well, yes, but it's also parked and the adaptive air suspension is in one of its lower height modes. Over here we have the quad exhaust tips really well integrated into the bumper, and I'll go ahead and let Nick come in close because what's really interesting about this is the way they've actually integrated it into the bumper with these hexagonal cutouts there. Those mirror some of the hexagonal aero outlets that we find right there on the rear of the vehicle. And then again, just classic Aston Martin design elements scaled all the way up to SUV proportions. So we have the big LED light pipe that runs right there from the hatch onto the side of the body, big wing right there on top, and we haven't talked about the outrageous orange paint yet, because it gets more outrageous because not only is it orange on the outside, you guessed it, it's pretty darn orange on the inside too. But before we get to the basketball colored interior, let's talk about what's living under the hood, because this is really the biggest development in Aston Martin's really long history, and that's their association with Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes owns about 10% of Aston Martin. Aston Martin actually has quite a number of really wealthy people and really wealthy companies that are currently owning and sponsoring Aston Martin. And the Mercedes connection is why we find an AMG 4-liter twin-turbo V8 under this hood, although the dial has been dialed all the way up to 11. This is actually one of the most powerful 4-liter Mercedes twin-turbo V8s ever constructed, and that's thanks, of course, to Aston Martin having some ex-AMG engineers and designers on staff. Power output, again, just under 700 horsepower in North America, 707 if you're talking about PS horsepower. And you can see under here a lot of the aluminum structure elements. This is a dedicated platform. It's not based on an existing Mercedes or anything like that. This is an Aston Martin platform. And you can see a lot of these really large structural aluminum pieces under here, kind of cool. Now, for the 707, this is the only way you can get the DBX for 2025. There used to be a less powerful base version. That's gone. In China, there was also a 3-liter inline-6 model. That's dead for 2025 as well. So 700 horsepower is the only way to go. And with it, also comes the latest Mercedes-Benz 9-speed automatic transmission. Mercedes calls this transmission their MCT line, or the multi-clutch line, and that's because it's a regular 9-speed Mercedes automatic, but they've deleted the torque converter. So instead of the torque converter, we have a single clutch between the engine and the transmission. It's not a traditional dual clutch transmission, so there are just a few gives and takes when it comes to the comparison between this and a regular dual clutch transmission. We'll talk about that in the drive. Let's get back on the inside though. Obviously, the first thing you're gonna notice as you hop inside is the acres and acres of orange, or those candy peanuts that I remember as a kid. That's what I see when I think of this particular shade of orange. But if you want practically any shade, you can get that in an Aston Martin, because there's a high level of customization and configurability available. And if you're willing to pay enough, you can do an awful lot that's not on the menu directly either. I found these seats to be a little bit less comfortable than I had expected, to be perfectly honest, given the price tag of the Aston Martin. But that's mainly because these are really designed to be very supportive sports seats. Just check out the design. We have really aggressive adjustable bolsters on the side. Those are really, really aggressive bolsters. Pretty aggressive seat bottom cushion bolsters too. That does make getting in and out of the seat a little bit tricky. And then the seat controls that you can see down there, those are a little bit unusual for some luxury vehicles. They aren't borrowing seat switches directly from any vehicle that I am aware of at any rate. So lots of unique components inside here. Headroom, pretty generous. This model has this big panoramic moonroof, but it doesn't open. It just has a powered shade there. Let's check out the back seat. That driver's seat is comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. No auto buyer's guide review would be complete without answering the question, will child seats fit? We have latch anchors in the outboard seating position. Let's go ahead and give it a measure. 11 inches right there. And to the seat back, 28.5. That would be a really, really tight call, putting rear-facing child seats behind those. But adults, they're going to be pretty darn comfortable back here. Air vents happen not only here in the center console, but also on the door jambs. That's a really nice touch. And headroom, surprisingly generous for an ultra sporty SUV. I had sort of expected this to be along the lines of some of the ultra luxury sports coupes that we find out there, something like the BMW X6 on the really top end, the X6M, etc. We actually find a more generous headroom profile back here. Of course, in the cargo area, we do find compromises due to the slinky profile of the DBX707, and that would be the cargo area here. We have just over 22 cubic feet of storage space in the back. I'll go ahead and push those bags in. Of course, remember that most European car companies, they measure cargo room below this cargo divider. And it is a leather-wrapped, fixed-in-place cargo divider. You can unsnap it, but it doesn't roll away or hide into any sort of cubby like that. Decent amount of cargo capacity, but there's actually something unexpected behind door number 6, and that's this right here. We actually have a spare tire, something that I honestly did not expect to find in the DBX at all. Of course, it is one of those inflatable spare tires. If you want to know how that works, there is a video on the channel where I actually inflate one, so you can see what that looks like. And that logically has an impact on the cargo capacity. Also, the fact that this has an adaptive air suspension system has an effect on the cargo capacity as well. Let's check out the cargo area opening width, 42.5 inches, so no 4x sheets of anything are going in this SUV. Now let's check out the orangeness of this interior, because there is a ton of it. Although, surprisingly, the powered shade, which you'll see closing here in a moment, that is one of the elements that is not orange. It's actually kind of a gray, mid-gray, sort of Alcantara-like fabric. Really contrasts with all the leather in here. And that's the other thing to know, is that this is not orange plastic or orange fabric. This is all leather coated, and Aston really, really loves their leather, including things like these door handles here, the assist handles getting in and out of the interior. Those are all leather. On the inside, it's actually wrapped in the same sort of Alcantara fabric that we find in that roller shade. Lots of speakers all the way around. This has the optional Bowers & Wilkins audio system. Yep, it is optional, even for $250,000. So we get metal speaker grates all the way around the interior, and the iconic speakers in the dashboard as well. Under here, we find more of those sort of gray touches. Little itty bitty vanity mirror there. I'm surprised how small that is. Leather wrapped sun visors, and they're fixed in place. So this one is the one that moves to the side. And this one is always there. It doesn't extend, however. So I do find coverage just a little bit lacking, I would have to say. Here we find controls for the panoramic moonroof's shade. We also have the map lights there, and we have the telematics buttons there under those little fighter jet style covers. Now, as far as the rest of the interior goes, it did get an update for 2025 to try and address some of the concerns that Aston Martin customers had about the infotainment system and the general design of the dashboard. So the screen's got a little bit bigger, the software is completely different in that system. I'll show you that in just a second. But feature set wise, of course, we have a powered tilt telescopic steering column. And as you'd expect, features like the telescopic steering column and some of the controls have been borrowed from Mercedes. That's quite logical, of course, because Mercedes owns part of Aston Martin, and why reinvent the wheel when we're talking about the power controls, the turn signal stock, etc., or the light switches down below. But the rest of the controls are decidedly Aston Martin. I do suspect that some of the components behind the scenes are maybe Mercedes derived, like these little touch controllers, sort of like a 2000s BlackBerry on the steering wheel, but they've been reskinned to look in keeping with the rest of the Aston Martin lineup. Now let's take a look at some of the crazy orange details. As you can see, leather all the way down there on the bottom of the door, orange leather as well. Lots of attention to detail when it comes to the stitching, and you'll notice that in the door panels and in the seats as well. They have this really eccentric stitching pattern which adds some texture and some visual appeal to the seats. These are heated and ventilated, of course, just as you'd expect, and yes, that is real carbon fiber on the doors and real metal for those speaker grills. We do have some piano black, which is not my favorite, running across the dashboard because it is showing signs of fine scratches, and this vehicle is not that old. The Bowers & Wilkins audio system, of course, would not be complete without distinctive speaker grills, so of course we find one right there in the center of the vehicle with that sort of waterfall flowing metal accent running across the dashboard, and that mirrors those tweeters that are way up there by the A-pillars in the vehicle. Now, the infotainment system, this is not a Mercedes design. This is an in-house Aston Martin design. Apparently, it's running on Linux, so it's based on a somewhat familiar back end. Lots of customization available in the system, but it's not quite as snappy and not quite as feature-rich as some competitive infotainment systems out there, especially in the more mainstream side of the luxury segment, but it does feature smartphone integration like CarPlay and Android Auto. Over here we have big air vents. You can close them off with that little knob in the middle. Nice big wireless charging mat right there, which is quite handy. Over here on this side, we find the button to the glove compartment, but in case you're wondering, we could not fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. Even if we remove that instruction manual, it's just a little bit too big and it actually interferes with the latch right there. So the glove compartment is just a little bit on the small side for our testing. Over here we have controls, some physical controls for the air conditioning and climate control system, along with roller controls here as well, and then some controls are actually done via the infotainment system as well. The drive mode dial doesn't just have a really great feel to it, it has an incredible clicky sound to it as well. That's definitely an interesting attention to detail. Of course, around that we have lots of shiny black plastic, again, that is showing fine signs of scratching. Touch controls for the heated and ventilated front seats, and you can heat them and ventilate them at the same time. Then we have another huge button bank down here for things like the adaptive air suspension. You can adjust the ride height with that one over there. The automated parking system, that software appears to be borrowed out of the Mercedes lineup. We have a 360-degree camera there. As you can see, you can also do the augmented reality views as you spin around. But, my car is not orange. A little bit sad about that. Let's move back behind there in the center console. Two small cup holders. I don't think the larger takeout drinks would fit in there, and that lid is also piano black. We then have armrests that extend for the driver and front passenger. Those come out right like that, covering that cup holder. And then under there, we have a surprisingly large storage area with some USB-C ports. Let's go all the way over here back to the driver's side. You can see that the instrument cluster binnacle has some piano black accents around. Leather top to it right there, the other speaker up there on the dashboard, and then we do have a full color LCD instrument cluster, of course, as you'd expect. Big metal shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel. The steering wheel is not enormously chunky, it's actually really comfortable. We also have a leather wrapped airbag cover. Over here we have controls for the infotainment system, and again those little touch knobs that are used to interact with the instrument cluster right there, as well as the adaptive cruise control over here. To the left of the steering column, we have another air vent there, more piano black, of course, lots more carbon fiber there, and again, the same sort of headlight controls that we find in a regular Mercedes. Under the center console, we have another storage area. It's a floating center console design, and as you can see, we have an iPad in there right now. Also, a USB cable dangling around because I do have my phone connected via wired CarPlay. Wireless CarPlay is available, just in case you're wondering. All right, let's get the DBX707 out on the road, and behind the wheel right now is Travis. I'm not
Travis.
Sorry, my bad. This is Nick. This is not Travis, everybody. This implies how many days I have been on the road. But at any rate, so previous to filming this, I did a quick 0 to 60 run. Want to guess?
Ooh, 700 horsepower. I'm gonna say 3.2 seconds.
3 seconds flat.
Oh, wow.
This is wicked fast.
Yeah, that's pretty
and you can definitely thank the 9-speed automatic transmission for that. And the fact that, of course, it doesn't have a torque converter, so it just has those direct clutch engagements. It feels really harsh when you're actually in the ultra sporty modes and you just romp on the throttle, which hopefully we'll be able to do here in a moment if the road clears out. 60 to 0, 285 width tires up front, 325s in the back, and these are Pirelli P0 summer tires.
Sticky.
Yeah, sticky. It took just 101 feet, and it's not exactly dry outside. The roads are a little bit moist.
And as you can hear, as I'm coming around this corner, I have it in Sport Plus right now, so the downshifts are very aggressive. Much more aggressive than I'd ever want in a daily driver. But for those times you want to be a degenerate, it's a fun little party trick.
And the engine sounds very civilized, I have to say. Mercedes 4-liter engine has always had a fantastic sound to it in every Mercedes that it's been in. But it appears that Aston is not piping the same kind of digital exhaust noise into the cabin that we find in some BMW models. So it's actually pretty hushed.
Yeah.
Because, of course, we have those turbos in the way of the exhaust. So I don't know how you feel about that. I actually like that.
Yeah, it's a tough balance for me. It's like I don't have 250 grand to spend on a car, so I don't know what my... I have $25 to spend on a car, and I'd love to hear this sound way more than I do right now. But if I was someone that could afford $250,000 for a family hauler SUV, quote unquote family hauler, I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't want it to be loud, and it does get a little bit louder in Sport Plus. I don't know if that's piped in noise like you were just mentioning that you don't think there is. There might be a tad bit.
I think there is a little bit. It's just not as aggressive, not as dialed up as we see in the BMW lineup.
Right. Of course.
You will be driving the Dodge Durango Hellcat in a few days here, and because Dodge brought one along. Hey, why not? I actually think that I like this sort of more muted engine sound better than what we find in the SRT or in the Hellcat. Yeah, because it's not just that the engine is loud. Of course it is, and you can adjust the exhaust with the little buttons there for the exhaust. It's that it sounds really well engineered. Like that sound, they've had so many audio engineers working on that exhaust tuning to be perfect. It's not just, let's just toss an aftermarket high flow exhaust on there and call it good.
Yeah, what it reminds me of, it's like I'm holding back a beast under the hood, right? So it's got the nearly 700 horsepower here in the American version of this 707. And it's like, you can't use all of that on the public roads without breaking all the laws. So
That's true.
It's like I have a leash on a tiger. It's like, it's so aggressive. I can feel that it has all the power, but it just wants to jump. It wants, especially when you're in Sport Plus, which I'm in right now. I will take it out of it because it is just a little too aggressive for our driving that we are currently doing. And once you just go into your GT mode or your individual mode, it really calms down. Like that sound is gone. It doesn't want to jump out of its socks. It's crazy how those different drive modes change this just a little bit here and there.
And Aston says that they have retuned the adaptive air suspension for 2025. But I do find that the ride quality is still pretty firm. This road's actually really well paved. Coming up here on I-5 from Portland, I noticed that on expansion joints, like on the freeway, you really feel the mid of the cabin because this has 23-inch wheels on it and seriously low-profile tires. I don't know if I want to know exactly how much mounting a 325 with tire on the back of this would cost, but it's not going to be cheap.
Yeah, they are very, very large wheels. Although you almost need a P0, a wide tire, you need that type of performance in terms of tires to be able to put all the power to the ground. Now this is all-wheel drive, correct?
It is. So actually, let's go ahead and just stop right up here because this is a relatively wide road. Obviously not breaking any rules on the speed limit, but let's just see how the engagement of that all-wheel drive is from a stop. And obviously how brutal the acceleration is as well.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, start-stop did us there. But yeah, definitely very aggressive. You can really feel the crispness of those shifts.
Wow.
Very, very quick, even with the start-stop there.
Yeah.
You know, I'm seriously impressed, but I have to say, though, it also feels more elegant than the Mercedes versions of this same transmission.
Mm-hmm. It does feel nice in certain drive modes. It's not as aggressive, and just back then, doing that acceleration, it did suck having that auto start-stop, but it's on GT mode. It's not, it's not an aggressive mode.
We will have to hunt. Oh, there's the button. There's the auto start-stop disable button. So it does have one. You're not obviously, you know, required to stop the engine, but it's, you know, even with it and the turbos that spooled down, etc. So even with all of that and the regular drive mode, still pretty darn quick.
The polarity of having auto start-stop on a 700 horsepower engine is so funny to me, because it's like you're not getting efficiency out of this. I mean, obviously you can try your best, but 700 horsepower, what are we going to do?
Right, that's true. On the other hand, it is, you know, significantly more efficient than the other 700 horsepower SUV that we're going to be driving here, of course, which is the Dodge Durango Hellcat. Exactly why Dodge brought it along. This is a tale actually for that video, guys, but like why Dodge brought it along, I don't know, because it's discontinued. So
yeah,
you know,
I'm excited to drive it though. It's
yeah.
like one of the. It's like I'm finally catching something that's disappearing, because I've driven your SRT Durango. I've not driven a Hellcat Durango, so I'm finishing out the lineup, which is going to be nice. And it's also going to be interesting to compare that 700 horsepower to this 700 horsepower.
Yeah.
And this is probably going to feel a lot more refined and more exotic than it does muscle. Although
this is kind of muscly,
European
but it's
muscle.
Yeah, it's European muscle. Definitely a different character because, of course, this has the twin turbos. So there is a tiny bit of turbo lag. It does take a bit of time for them to spool up.
Yep.
And the supercharger has that distinctive supercharger whine. It has a lot of low-end torque. I mean, we have much bigger displacement. The downside is fuel efficiency. I mean, you know, we've been doing a lot of idling, photo shooting this vehicle, etc., and it's averaging about 14 miles per gallon. That may not sound great to people out there, but it's way better than other 700 horsepower vehicles. And driving this up on I-5, I was averaging 25 miles per gallon on the highway at 70 miles an hour. Just set the cruise control.
I take back my statement earlier. You do get efficiency with 700 horsepower.
Yeah, I mean, there's you know, it's relative, right?
Yep.
You know, it's you're also paying $250,000 for that skosh more efficiency. Now, probably the last thing we should talk about is cabin noise. You know, it's not the quietest entry in this segment. Shouldn't surprise, of course. I mean, we have pretty wide sticky tires on it.
Yeah, we're pretty spoiled in this exact moment. And this is my first time riding this vehicle, just a caveat, because he drove it from the airport. I'm just now riding in this. This road is actually surprisingly paved very well for this area. Road. So it's hard to really feel what the Pacific Northwest roads have to offer, because back where I'm staying up in the top part of Washington, it's a lot worse than right here. So I would assume it's going to be a lot louder, but you definitely do feel the downfalls of having P0 super wide performance tires on this vehicle. Now, how much does this weigh?
This particular DBX is 4,950 pounds approximately. Yeah, it's actually surprisingly light, but of course Aston Martin uses a lot of aluminum in the construction. So this is one of their dedicated aluminum lightweight vehicle platforms, and that's part of why it just feels so bonkers, because it's not just the thrust, it's the handling ability of this DBX. I mean, we have an adaptive air suspension with a solid amount of ground clearance. We have a four-wheel drive system on board, you know, rear limited slip that can basically give us some locking capability in the back. But this handles like you would not believe. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I hope to experience that here, maybe on a different road than we're on right now, as it's just straight, but it feels nimble. It feels a lot lighter. Well, I guess it is pretty light. I thought it was mid 5,000 pounds. At 4,900, not bad. So I'm going to find a curvy road here in a little bit and actually experience that. But overall, driving the little I have, it feels like a very composed vehicle, and for $250,000, I'd really hope.
It feels very adult.
Yeah,
it's grown up.
This is the refined vehicle that a scholar would buy, and then the Durango Hellcat is. Well, now paints its own picture.
Here is the question: for $250,000, would you? Well, let's go $250,000 and over. So would you get something like this for the look, or G-Wagon? You could G-Wagon for about this money. You know, this is above XM, so above X6M, it's above GLE AMG, so you're talking pretty rarefied. I mean, Lamborghini Urus, that's not exactly the same thing, but you know, hey, that's if you could afford one of these, you could probably afford one of those.
Yeah.
So what would your pick? Would you Urus? Would you Urus? Would you this? Would you G-Wagon AMG? Like,
how's
your vibe?
Here's where the price, and this is assuming I would have the money. If I had the money to fork out $250,000, I'd probably feel different. But right now, $250,000 for an SUV is out of my realm of want, because for an SUV, I want to use it as an SUV.
But here, that's the trick here. So not only, which would you pick? Because you have to imagine yourself as someone that has the money and wants one.
Oh God, that's hard. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'd go different routes and save the money for.
You're not Aston Martin's demographic.
No,
come on,
I'm
think
not.
trust fund, baby. Think Monaco, lives in Monaco trust fund, baby.
Oh man.
That
I mean, if I have unlimited money, sure, why not? I'll take this and then the other color that's not orange, and I'll take all of them.
I would take it not in orange. I love this interior. It is difficult for my brain to get past just the sheer amount of orange in here.
There's a lot of reflection off the dashboard on the windshield. Like I just see windshield. I see the gauge cluster on the windshield. So keep that in mind. If you are shopping for this, you are going to see a lot of dashboard when the sun is at a certain angle.
And you will see a lot of people not only looking at the DBX, you'll see them do this long sort of double take when they realize that not only is it orange creamsicle on the outside, it's orange creamsicle on the inside.
Yeah. We had some landscapers back at the parking lot that were
doing the what? Huh?
Yeah, they were like, "What in the world is that James and the Giant Peach vehicle?" Yeah,
but you know, on the other hand, you buy a DBX because you want to get looked at.
It's true.
If you were worried that the DBX would drive like a Mercedes because it has a decent amount of DNA baked in, remember that humans share an awful lot of DNA with a frog, and we don't look or feel like frogs. That's exactly how it is with the Aston Martin. It may have a Mercedes engine, it may have a Mercedes transmission, it may have a decent number of Mercedes buttons and some unknown amount of Mercedes software and Mercedes hardware lurking somewhere under the body panels, but it is a completely different animal and it has a feel all to itself. I actually think that this version of the Mercedes twin-turbo 4-liter V8 and 9-speed automatic transmission is actually my favorite version of this combo. I have been a little bit harsh on Mercedes MCT transmissions for a while because in some ways they're the worst of both worlds. They're not quite as rapid as a dual-clutch transmission, but they're not as smooth in daily driving as a regular 9-speed automatic would be. And this is one of the smoothest interpretations of the MCT transmission. And that all seems to be thanks to the Aston Martin team and their refinement and their development and their programming of it specifically for the DBX707. Really, the only problem with the DBX is its price tag. And at $253,000 starting, and you know that it goes up an awful lot higher than $250,000, you really have an awful lot of options to choose. And you're probably buying multiples, let's be honest. If you're spending $250,000 on a car, this is not your only $250,000 car. And the question really is, do you want this next to that G-Wagon in your garage? This actually, I think, is more interesting to me than a G-Wagon because it's better on-road than the G-Wagon. It's not quite as cargo practical, but it does a decent number of SUV things relatively well. It has a surprising amount of ground clearance. Of course, has a pretty capable all-wheel drive system with the torque vectoring axle in the back. And again, a lot of Mercedes DNA baked into the rest of the system. Of course, has a really unique look. I just wouldn't get an orange one. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And of course, stay tuned because we have a number of other videos that we're working on. We're filming this out here in Portland, and there are going to be a number of videos dropping in pretty short order. See all of you later.